Great. Thank you, Rob. It's good to see everybody. I recognize a lot of names and some faces, but I definitely don't know a lot of you. So welcome and thanks for coming. So tonight, I think when Ajahn Nisabo and I were originally approached about giving teachings, we wanted to do something on perhaps consecutive Thursdays or consecutive weeks, and we thought to maybe cover the four bases of right speech. And Ajahn Nisabo is going to talk about refraining from lying and refraining from perhaps malicious speech. And I was going to do refraining from harsh speech and refraining from idle chatter. But just over the last week or so, with things ramping up in Gaza and all the violence around the world, really felt like I'd like to go a bit more specifically into what is right speech in times of war. And to frame that, we've got a Google Doc, and Rob, could you put that in the chat, maybe the link to that? And everyone can follow along. I'll also be screen sharing, but if you want to kind of look ahead, then you're welcome to do that. So just as a general outline for what the evening will be like, I'll speak for about half an hour to start with. The evening will be sprinkled with several mini meditations. These will be times when I'll just turn off the share screen and we can just sit for 3, 4, 5 minutes together around specific themes of embodiment. This is something which I feel is very important, and it's a very useful tool when relating to speech, is how to come back into our bodies when we're being triggered on a cognitive level, being triggered in interactions. So these are all body-based, so we'll have a number of these mini meditations. I'll present the first half and then open it up to about 15 minutes of questions from people. So you can store up your questions, you can put them in the chat, and I can address them via text at that point, or you can raise your hand and ask questions then. And then after that 15 minutes or so, we'll go back and present the second half of the main discourse, which I'll be discussing. And then there'll be a period of 15 minutes at the end for more questions. So when we talk about war, it's how does one do this in a Buddhist context? The first thing I wanted to bring people's attention to is this sutta, which brings up this idea. I'll just read it. So it's addressed to monastics, to bhikkhus, and this is a significant point. So one could make a good case, perhaps, that this discourse is just for renunciants. This is just for people who are living a life which is separated from the world, and that it would not perhaps apply to lay people who are living a more engaged life. And maybe someone might make the case that this is only for monastics at the time of the Buddha, that it wouldn't apply to modern monastics even, and certainly not modern lay people. But I'll just read the sutta and see how it might apply to your situation. Bhante Analayo, a very well-respected scholar monk, makes the case that when the Buddha refers to or addresses his audience as bhikkhave, or that's the plural for monks, it's the vocative case. So this is basically an address. So, oh, you who are listening to me. Although he'll say bhikkhus, there are suttas where there's obviously bhikkhunis or female renunciates, as well as laymen and laywomen in his audience. And he'll just use the singular word bhikkhu as a catch-all phrase. So he'll translate that term in suttas as practitioners, and you can take that to the extent that you find that it might be helpful. So practitioners do not engage in various kinds of pointless talk. That is, talk about kings, thieves, ministers of state, talk about armies, dangers, and wars. Then you've got a list of about 20 plus other topics of conversation, which he says should not be engaged in by monastics specifically. For what reason? Because practitioners, this talk is unbeneficial, irrelevant to the fundamentals of the holy life, and does not lead to disenchantment, nibbida, to dispassion, viraga, to cessation, to peace, to direct knowledge, to enlightenment, and to nibbana. This is a list of, I believe it's about 32 subjects, and it's not just in this sutta. This list occurs a number of places, and it is usually in being addressed to bhikkhus, but before I ordained, I found this list a helpful short list of topics of conversation to maybe put a question mark before I start engaging in topics such as these. Is this really going to be furthering the goal of my life? And I've known many lay people as well who've also find this to be a fascinating kind of checklist to, or a mirror. What I'm about to say, is this on that list, and why did the Buddha give this list? So the Buddha says, so don't talk about those things, but he didn't just say that's not the end of the story. There's more you can talk about, and you should talk about, practitioners. This is suffering. You should talk about, this is the origin of suffering. This is the cessation of suffering. This is the path leading to the cessation of suffering. That is, talk about the Four Noble Truths. Although in this previous passage, it's basically like the Buddha is cutting off so many different avenues for the way that most humans talk to each other most of the time, cutting off, it seems, all just chit-chat. But he opens this almost floodgate that we can talk as much as we want about dukkha and the cause of dukkha and the cessation of dukkha and the way leading to the cessation of dukkha. And that's great, because that's huge. I believe that the Buddha said in a discourse in the middle-length discourses, the Majjhima Nikaya, that if you had 4 well-versed and knowledgeable teachers who were very, very wise, very competent, they could speak at length for 100 years about the truth of dukkha, the cause of dukkha, the cessation of dukkha, and the path leading to that cessation for 100 years, and still they wouldn't have even put an end. They wouldn't have put an end to how much one can find insights into these Four Noble Truths. So why is it that these are allowable? It's because practitioners, this talk is beneficial. It's relevant to the fundamentals of the holy life. It leads to, I had done some editing of the translations. Revulsion is one translation for nibbida, but disenchantment is another, to dispassion, cessation, to peace, to direct knowledge, to enlightenment, to nibbana. And the last little section says, therefore, an exertion should be made to understand yogo karaniyo. A yoga should be applied. You should yoke yourself to this course of study, of mental reflection. This is dukkha. This is the cause of dukkha. This is the cessation, and this is the path leading to cessation. So I just bring that up as a something to perhaps challenge what seems to be being solicited so much, certainly on social media. Fortunately, most monastics, including myself, were not in the thick of social media, but being a student now, I do have the internet on a regular basis, which I didn't for most of my monastic life, but so I do check the news, and it seems like everyone has an opinion, and everyone is being called to make up their mind, and even be come down on one side or the other. And even if you do that, you come down on one side or the other of any of the numerous conflicts that are happening in the world today. You have people which are not satisfied with that, and so you come down on both sides, and people, that's there's so much nuance that goes into things, and it's so hard to capture that in conversation. So the Buddha here at least suggesting to monastics to sidestep, to go around, to perhaps not go into the thick of these different conversations on war and armies and kings or presidents or prime ministers of etc., but instead focus on the right here, right now of what is this dukkha? What is the path leading to the cessation of dukkha right here, right now, in this body? And hopefully we will go into the case that Bhikkhu Bodhi makes a case that the Four Noble Truths can be understood both in a vertical dimension, and that's the dimension of our own bodies and minds. And that's generally how the Buddha is speaking about dukkha, looking into how the seeming I caused suffering for myself and what I can do to not do that. But there's also a horizontal dimension Bhikkhu Bodhi speaks of, which is the suffering of other beings. And certainly that comes in droves when we speak about war. But as another just general framing about when we talk about speech in general, I find this quote from the Anguttara Nikaya, and everyone who has the link can go to it in any of these blue highlights or links that you can go and see the full discourse of. But this is the only place, I believe, in the canon where the Buddha speaks about the overarching purpose of discussion, basically the purpose of speech in general. And this applies both to myself presenting here. It applies to all of yourselves if you're interested in what the Buddha is speaking about. And it's not just on the speaking end of things, the presenting end of things. It's also on the listening end of things. So the discourse says, so for that is the purpose of discussion. That is the purpose of counsel, manta. That is the purpose of drawing near. That is the purpose of lending ear. That is the liberation of the heart, of the mind, through non-clinging. Anupada chittasa vimoka. Vimoka, the liberation, the freedom, chittasa, of the mind, of the heart, without attachment. Anupada. Upadana being clinging and attachment. That comes right after craving, independent origination. So that is significant and powerful enough to actually pause. And I won't stop sharing, but I would like to have one of these mini meditations that I've mentioned, just to come back into the body and come back to the actual feeling in the heart, and see if you can, with eyes closed or eyes open, unhooking from all of the cognitive Velcro that we're so enamored with. And even if you don't know how to do it, just letting the mind drop into the heart, the physical heart space behind the solar plexus in the chest. And from this heart space, just opening. That is, sensing out, see if you can find any limit to awareness from this heart space. You might think you could feel the front of your chest or the touch of your clothing in the front or the back or the sides, and that's the end of the story. That's the extent of one's capacity for felt awareness, but the body seems to feel further than that. The tactile sensation just seems to blur out in every direction. And you can take this as a simile for this liberation of the mind through non-clinging. So not clinging to perceptions of finiteness, just unclinging, disentangling, unattaching from conceptions of limitation. The liberation of the mind through non-clinging. Okay, so these mini meditations are meant to be intentionally brief. There's an author who I really appreciate, a Buddhist teacher named Locke Kelly, and he talks about how most people in modern psychology talks about peak experiences, PEAK experiences in one's life or one's meditation practice, but he also speaks about, and we can conceive of these mini meditations as being PEEK experiences. So I may have gotten those spellings mixed up, but basically peeking into a mind which is a heart which is free. So we'll do a number of these, and they're abrupt. We're on a serious discursive and discoursive thought train, but it's very good. There can be this tendency when we're so cerebral and going into study as we are tonight, to really become disembodied and literally to be leaning more and more forward, but keep coming back into the body is really helpful. And it's an especially good skill when we're going to this realm of speech, as we'll see. So the main focus of tonight's conversation will be the discourse on the simile of the saw. So this is Majjhima Nikaya number 21. And you can go to various translations by I.B. Horner, the great aunt of Ajahn Amaro, the amazing Pali scholar Iselin B. Horner, and Bhante Sujato, and maybe some translation by me. So it's a really great, it's such a rich sutta. We won't have really be able to dig into all of what it speaks to tonight, but I've just highlighted a couple of particular passages, which we'll go to. So the first comes just after a rather famous and well-known metaphor that the Buddha gives. The Buddha talks about a well-known lady of town named Videhika and her servant named Kali. So Videhika is well-known throughout the district. She's well-praised. People say she's very kind and gentle and easy to talk to. And Kali is a very skilled and normally very easy to get along with servant to Videhika. But at some point, Kali gets the idea, is Videhika, Mistress Videhika, really kind and gentle? Is she really so sweet and even-tempered? Or is it just because I'm so good at my work? So she starts testing her, starts waking up later and waking up later and waking up later. And after some time, Videhika, basically, the story is much more elaborated in the actual sutta, but eventually Videhika has had enough and takes a rolling pin and beats Kali over the head with it, and Kali's bleeding, and then goes about town saying, so here's how sweet and modest and even-tempered Mistress Videhika was. And then a bad report spread about Mistress Videhika. And similarly, that's the metaphor, that's the story that the Buddha gives. And the Buddha says that a practitioner, and here we go to the text that we have on the screen, a practitioner maybe sweetest of the sweet, the most even-tempered of the even-tempered, the calmest of the calm, so long as they don't encounter any disagreeable speech. But it's when one encounters disagreeable speech that you'll know whether someone is really sweet, sorata, really even-tempered, nivata, and calm. And we might go into some of this Pali at some point. But the Buddha continues, I don't say that a practitioner is easy to speak to. Suvacha or sovacha, we will go into this Pali term, if they make themselves easy to speak to only for the sake of getting what one wants. That's the gist of it. Literally, because he's speaking to monastics, he doesn't say someone's easy to speak to and makes themselves easy to speak to just for the sake of robes, alms, lodgings, and medicines for the sick. These are the famous 4 requisites of a monastic. But literally, it's just getting what you want. Why is that? Because when someone doesn't get what they want, they're no longer easy to speak to. But when a practitioner is easy to speak to purely because they honor, respect, revere, worship, and venerate the Dhamma, then I say that someone is easy to speak to. So I wanted to highlight this quality of being suvacha or soracha. It comes up in a number of different ways, suvacha, sovacha, sovachasa. But literally it means vacha is speech, and su is beautiful or kind or good, like sukha is the opposite of dukkha. So here we've got good or easy to speak to. Often you'll see it translated as easy to admonish, which is a monastic virtue, but I feel this term being easy to speak to is one which is more applicable. And it's a virtue which is praised all over the place in the Pali Canon. It comes up in the Metta Sutta. So when it said that patience, being straightforward and gentle in speech, humble and not conceited, contented and easily satisfied, unburdened with duties, and frugal in their ways. This being easy to speak to, it comes up in the Metta Sutta there and in the Mangala Sutta, the discourse on the highest blessings, as being a highest blessing or being as a prerequisite for metta practice. But it's something which probably most people here tonight won't know this word, but it's a good one to learn, even in the Pali, because it's praised so highly by the Buddha. And it's a quality which is in, unfortunately, short supply when what's praised in modern discourse and even in modern media or media context. So on social media, the quickness with which one can reply is often praised over this being easy to speak to. One is gets praises and likes and thumbs up and followed for being rather difficult to speak to and contentious. So not that there's never a place for speaking things which are hard to hear. There is, and the Buddha acknowledged that. But learning this skill, flexing this muscle of being suvacha, being easy to speak to. Before we continue with the Simile of the Saw, I just thought I'd introduce this discourse, the Anumana Sutta on inference, which the early commentaries called the Bhikkhu Patimokkha, and said that a practitioner should review themselves 3 times a day in this way to see if they're really as suvacha, as easy to speak to as the Buddha would like. So what venerables are the qualities that make one easy to speak to? So, and you can conceive of these, since we're somewhat framing tonight's conversation in conversations specifically about war, if it comes up, but also just the other various difficult conversation topics that come up. How do we make ourselves one who is able to not just pounce reactively on the people we're speaking to, but actually have the the presence of mind and the skillfulness of speech to speak with more patience, more pause, and thus get a reputation for being easy to speak to and not difficult to approach, difficult to speak to. So herein the Buddha gives 16 different, very common, exceedingly common, and almost, reading this list, you'll see yourself in them, or you'll certainly see family members or friends or business associates in this path. So, 2,500 years ago, the Buddha elaborated all of these very specific and predictable ways that we are not easy to speak to, the ways that we're reactive and unskillful with our speech. So here, one is not of evil wishes and in the thrall of evil desires. So that's defined elsewhere as being someone who doesn't want to receive feedback in a public space. So that's an evil desire, but rather one is okay with receiving feedback and being spoken to in a public setting. That's difficult. One does not exalt themselves or disparage others. One is not wrathful, overpowered by wrath. This is coda, or just anger. One is not wrathful or angry and a fault finder, and because of that, wrath or anger. They're not angry, and because of that anger, taking offense, so being easily triggered, easily provoked. They're not angry, and because of that, uttering words which border on wrath. And I think if I was doing the translation, actually, I would put anger here. Coda is the word. It's less extreme than wrath. That's quite strong, whereas coda is just it's angry. So in this characteristic of uttering words which are bordering on anger, this is fascinating. I find this in myself. If there's anger that's coming up, welling up, the heat is rising internally. And if I say something from that space, even if what I were to say was to be transcribed and someone else was to read it, and they would say, oh, that's just a totally neutral phrase. There are ways of speaking and being passive aggressive with our speech that is bordering on, it's touching anger. Like the transcript of what we say, it doesn't necessarily look like it's so angry, but it can be felt by the other person oftentimes that what we're saying is totally inflamed internally. So, and here, when reproved, so this is a setting of receiving feedback, and this can happen when you're discussing views about war, or views about basically anything that comes up. We all have, we're trained in a Western education system to really value our positions and opinions about things, and there's not necessarily anything inherently wrong with that, but when we attach to them and when reproved or getting feedback about our views or our opinions about things, we oftentimes blurt out and reprove the reprover. Say, who are you to give feedback to me? I'm going to give feedback to you. When reproved or given feedback to, you disparage the person who's speaking it to you, or you round on that reprover with more reproof, more feedback for them, or you shelve the question and ask the reprover another question, which is off point. So someone who's easy to speak to doesn't do that and does not show temper, ill will, and sulkiness. One is not harsh or spiteful, envious, treacherous, stubborn. And this last one, number 16, is very interesting. So Pali is Sanditi Paramasi Adanagahi Dupati Nisagi, just rolls off the tongue. It's all of this alliteration. One does not adhere tightly to one's own views or hold to them tenaciously or relinquish them. They do relinquish them easily. They do not hold on to their views tightly or tenaciously, but they are able to at least in the terms of the conversation, know how to put them down when they don't need to be held up. So that is definitely not a virtue which Americans learn necessarily in university, or really find value in. But the Buddha pointing to it here, I think, is a great highlight. So, and I've certainly seen it with myself, my monastic friends and lay friends who are able to not adhere tightly to their own views, hold on to them tenaciously, but are able to relinquish them, or at least not need to clench so tightly. It's beautiful. It really is beautiful. And it's good to learn how to talk about virtues as being beautiful. And when you have friends, and hopefully all of you do, who embody these things, embody being easy to speak to, you're readily able to bring that image to mind and say, yeah, that's, regardless of the traditional beauty or handsomeness of this person, this quality, it's absolutely beautiful. It's stunning. It's bright. It's worthy of emulation. So those are the things that make one easy to speak to. So that was a brief, somewhat less than brief aside. And we'll come back to the simile on the saw. So here the Buddha says, so practitioners, you should train yourselves. We will be easy to speak to. That is suvacho or sovacha, purely because we honor, respect, revere, worship, and venerate the Dhamma. That's how you should train yourself. So for many of you, I don't know all of you. I know the ones who I do know. Many of you do have an evolving relationship with the Triple Gem, the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. And if you do, if you've got a shrine in your house and you are practicing or learning and seeing some benefit in bowing and giving, honoring, respecting, revering, and practicing the gestures of respect and honor, then this is meaningful for you. If you don't have a relationship with the Dhamma, then maybe you could just replace that with truth here. So I'll be easy to speak to because I honor, respect, and venerate the truth of things. And how that might apply here when you're being challenged is from a neutral and cool point of view. The extent of my view about things is absolutely not the full truth. The full truth is much more expansive than how I'm seeing something. So and respecting that with humility. That's what the Buddha is pointing to in this. For someone who does have a relationship with the Buddha and the Dhamma, this kind of training is quite fascinating. And it is a training, and it's framed in the way of being an affirmation. So what is this Dhamma affirmation? The Buddha has many of these instances where he says, thus practitioners should you train yourselves, evan hivo bhikkhave sikitabang. And we've actually got a link here to a whole book, which myself and another monk put together a long time ago, with every instance in the canon where the Buddha uses this, what's called a pericope, or a stock phrase of, thus you should train yourselves. So the Buddha will say, before he gives an affirmation, so practitioners, you should train yourselves, and quote, it uses the Pali equivalent of a quote, T. We will be easy to speak to purely because we honor, respect, revere, worship, and venerate the Dhamma, unquote. That is how you should train yourselves. That's fascinating that the Buddha would give us these actual phrases, which myself and many other practitioners I know have memorized these. And why it's useful to memorize something like this is because in the heat of the moment, when we're being challenged, it can be difficult to remember our principles, because the limbic system is going into fight mode, and we forget the higher brain functions of the things that we honor the higher truths that we actually, when we're more cool-headed and coming from a more rational and cool space, the things that we value, like being able to listen to other people. So here I go off on the document here to a little bit of a grammatical sidebar about a future passive participle. What does it mean that the Buddha would say should? And I don't think I'll go into that, just for time's sake. I might later if people are interested. And it's the use of this future passive participle, the should. There are it does occur quite often in the Buddhist discourses. So I think I'll skip that for the time being. And we can jump right in because it's it's good to be able to learn how to disconnect. We're on a thought train and then, okay, coming back into the body. We'll do another mini meditations here. And with this one, I'll invite people to just bring your hands up in this gesture. I think I've heard it called in English prayer hands. In Pali and Sanskrit, it's Anjali. And yeah, I think it's in the American gesture lexicon these days, gesture con. So you can do this, and yeah, you can with your eyes closed or not. Hands here coming into the body. Just practice, and I'll say the words in case you have your eyes closed, but with hands here. And if you memorize this pericope, you memorize this affirmation, then you can do it as well. And you can do this gesture in a conflict. It does calm things down. So bringing the hands up with the intention both to settle oneself, to calm oneself, to listen. Just here, feeling the hands. And here again, feeling the limitlessness of the hands. The eyes closed, there's no real delineation. There's no skin line, it doesn't seem. So this abundant, exalted, immeasurable perception that there doesn't need to be a limit. Not clinging or attaching to any limit. And just, I'll be easy to speak to purely because I honor, respect, revere, worship, and venerate the Dhamma. I'll be easy to speak to because I worship and venerate the Dhamma. Yeah. So I heartily invite people, when we shift to a more cerebral part of the session again, coming back to the texts, to just stay in the body, to stay with that embodiment, with whether it's in the hands or in the heart or wherever, or the whole body. I just stay with that. And now, just to break things up, actually come to a Q&A period. So if anyone, we've covered a lot and covered a lot fairly quickly. So just open it up. People can put comments or questions in the chat, or just raise your hand. So Vanessa, please.
Hi. I have a question about number 11 in the list. It says one reproved succeeds in explaining their movements to the reprover. And it seems like partially it's out of my control whether they actually understand. But in that case, maybe success would be equanimity if they don't? Because succeed in explaining, I guess you'd have to understand what success would be measured by.
Yeah, this is a very good point. And yeah, that's actually I'm actually not quite familiar with this translation that I posted. I'm just going to give a quick look. I believe that's from Bhante Sujato. I'll just look what I.B. Horner has there. Because yeah, that seems like a very difficult thing to do, is to gauge yeah, someone else's. Actually, that is I.B. Horner's translation. If anyone is actually clicking on those links, I encourage you to do so. But Sutta Central is great, and learning how to work with this framework is really helpful. There's a lot there. Yeah, I apologize, Vanessa. I can't actually find that. But yeah, I'll keep giving it some thought. Might have a good response later. I'll see if I can find the Pali. And if anyone else wanted to share their thoughts as well, thank you for the question. That one in particular does seem difficult to do, especially if people are not really in a place to hear one another's when they're coming from such heat. So I'm probably mispronounce your name, but MJ?
Yeah, it's MJ.
Oh, good.
Thank you. Yeah, I just had a experience that I wanted to get your feedback on with the Anjali mudra that I agree with is very calming and grounding and does tend to calm. But I had an experience with a conflict with a friend of a friend, and in an effort to calm myself and my communication, I did this, and the response was a very negative reaction. Kind of it increased their energy of discomfort and judgment, and so this actually kind of invited more attack and anger. So I just wanted to see if you had any response to that kind of response.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. And I've experienced the same thing, even in a monastery with another monk. Yeah, it seemed to like trigger them all the more. So yeah, being able to predict that, and the mind can be so tricky. It can even be a passive aggressive, tool of, yeah, I know you're going to get annoyed at this, so I'm going to do it all the more. But yeah, if one's intention really is to settle and calm a conflict or a conversation, then having the metacognition and the wisdom to actually think, what would this person's reaction to this gesture be? And if that won't work, then other gestures with the body, like literally like stepping back or even sitting down. That's something with my monastic brothers, this probably wouldn't be so workable for most people, but in the monasteries that I live at, there aren't that many chairs. In the monk spaces, it's just like a lot of space, and monks are like sitting on the ground or kneeling on the ground with one another. And I have found though that if I'm having a standing up conversation, which turns into a bit of a heated conversation, then actually saying, I prefer, can we sit down on the ground? And that does have a settling effect for the conversation. And so if you can do that, shift into a different stance, literally, that can help. But being mindful about what might trigger people is always good. So yeah, thank you, MJ.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. And is there anyone who, I can't see everyone, but if there's anyone in the back who, if you could actually, if people have questions either now or in the future, use the little upper left hand, little hand like that. I could see it easier that way. But if no one has any questions, then we can just go on. There's a lot to cover in this sutta. So back to sharing screen. Okay, so we've introduced this concept of a Dhamma affirmation, this thus should you train yourself, and we'll encounter a few more of these throughout the whole of the sutta. This is one of the suttas where this particular pattern where the Buddha says, thus you should train yourself, occurs the most. So the Buddha begins by talking about, he kind of just, this is still in the Simile of the Saw. Buddha says there are 5 ways of speaking in which others, when speaking to you, or when you speaking to others, might speak. So one might speak at the right time or at the wrong time. And this is something which you just have to get a feel for and become skilled at. The Buddha, in another discourse, talked about 7 different types of intelligence, anyu, or ways of knowing, knowledge. And one of them is kalanyu, or a temporal intelligence, knowing the right time for things. This is the time to engage in a conversation with someone. This is the time for me to step back, actually, in this conversation. This is the time for me to give another perspective in this conversation, or this is the time for me definitely not to assert my position on this topic if my goal is both my own well-being and the other person's well-being. And hopefully, when we're interacting with other people, we can bring their well-being to mind as well, even when being challenged, being able to actually consider, if I'm engaging this person in a conversation, having this in the back of one's mind, I want to learn from this conversation. But if I feel like I have anything that's actually valuable to say, I also genuinely want the other person to be able to hear it. So paying attention to the right time for that is good. But you can only take account for, take responsibility for your side of the equation. So when I'm speaking, I'll try to speak at the right time. But other people might come to me at the wrong time. Either they're angry and they're not speaking coherently, or they're speaking angry and they're speaking super coherently, but the anger is clouding their own judgment. Or it's just, it's not a good time for me. They're coming up to me at the wrong time. People can come up to me, or they might speak according to fact or not according to fact. And when we speak, this is one of the precepts, I'll try to speak that which is true, but other people might not necessarily be keeping to that principle. And even if they are, they might be reporting things which are not factual. There's so many sources of information these days, and so little fact checking that is done. And it's so easy to go with our own biases and not do fact checking about things. So it's very common that other people might speak to us in ways which are not according to fact, not factual. People can speak, and we can speak either gently or harshly. And for the most part, part of the third aspect of right speech, which is refraining from harsh speech, the Buddha did encourage learning how to speak gently, sanha, learning how to not speak harshly. But there are occasions when the Buddha did speak harshly, when his cousin Devadatta was going to cause a schism in the Sangha. He spoke harshly. There are occasions where a teacher needs to speak harshly to their student to avoid harm, or when a parent needs to speak harshly to their child to avoid some kind of danger. So this isn't as black and white as the training on speaking factually, on not lying. Speaking gently is a good training, but even better is learning how to not speak harshly and knowing if and when there is an occasion for speaking harshly, but not coming from a place of ill will. But other people, that's our business. But other people, very normal, very, very normal for people to speak harshly. Another translation could be roughly, or you know how people talk. It can get rough sometimes. People can speak, or we can speak on what is connected with the goal. This is atta, which is connected with the goal, or that which is beneficial, or they can speak unbeneficially. That's probably a better translation here. They can speak in a way which is beneficial or unbeneficial. And we ourselves can try to only say things which are beneficial. The Buddha was once asked, would you ever speak that which is untrue? And the Buddha says, no. And the Buddha is asked then, this is the Bodhi Rajakumara Sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya, I believe. But the Buddha is then asked, would you ever speak that which is unbeneficial? And the Buddha says, no. And the Buddha said, occasions when somewhat appearingly harsh speech is a skillful means. And certainly other people just, talk about all sorts of meaningless stuff a lot of the time. Or people can speak with a mind of friendliness or metta, or a mind full of inner hatred or secret hatred, dos antara, inner hate, inner ill will. So for ourselves, we can try to speak from this place of the metta citta. But others can come from dosa. They can come from this dvesha, this hatred, this ill will. And the Buddha says that regardless, so whether someone comes up to us in any of these 10 different ways, here practitioners, you should train yourselves regardless of that, regardless of if they come up to us at the wrong time, talking things that aren't true, and they're speaking harsh, and it's unbeneficial, and they're full of hate. Still, you should train yourselves. Neither will our minds become perverted, is the word here, but it's literally will flip. Neither will our minds flip. They won't become otherwise, that is, lose their balance. Nor will we utter speech, utter an evil speech. This is unwholesome speech. But kindly and compassionate, we will dwell with a mind of loving kindness, a mind of friendliness, of metta, devoid of hatred. And we will abide pervading that person with a mind imbued with loving kindness. And beginning with them, we will abide pervading the all-encompassing world with a mind imbued with loving kindness, abundant, exalted, immeasurable, without hostility and without ill will. Unquote. This is how you should train yourselves, practitioners. So for anyone who is familiar with, say, the chanting books of the Western Sangha, so this Amaravati students of monasteries in the lineage of Ajahn Chah, part of this stock phrase occurs there. So if people have spent any time around monasteries, you're learning this affirmation, this I will abide pervading the all-encompassing world with a mind imbued with loving kindness, abundant, exalted, immeasurable, without hostility and without ill will. That's how you should train yourself. So that's the general pattern. But then the Buddha proceeds to give 4 amazing similes, each of which are very powerful meditative tools to keep in mind. So the Buddha says, so suppose someone were to come along with a shovel and basket and might speak thus, I will make this great earth not be earth. So they dig here and there, and they toss it here and there. They spit here and there. They urinate here and there, thinking, be without earth, be without earth. What do you think about this, practitioners? Could that person make this great earth be without earth? No, Venerable Sir, why is that? Because the earth is great, Lord. The earth is deep. It is immeasurable. It is not easy to make the earth be without earth. That person will eventually get weary and frustrated. So amazing, amazing simile. And the Buddha then continues, even so, practitioners, there are these 5 ways of speaking, which others, when they speak to you, might speak. So someone comes up to you with their verbal hoe and their verbal basket, determined to basically dig you up. And they might speak in a way which is untrue, and it's not kind, and it's not the right time, and it's unbeneficial, and they're full of hate. But still, you should practice and train yourselves thus. The same introductory, neither will our minds become perverted or flip, nor will we utter an evil speech, but kindly and compassionate, we will dwell with a mind of loving kindness, devoid of hatred, and we will abide pervading that person with a mind imbued with loving kindness, and beginning with them, we will abide pervading the all-encompassing world with a mind imbued with loving kindness, like the earth. This is an insertion into that stock phrase, abundant, exalted, immeasurable, without hostility and without ill will. That is how you should train yourselves, practitioners. So here we'll jump right into another mini meditation and bringing this principle of earthiness, of settledness into the body, and specifically ask people to bring your attention to either your root, or let's say bring your attention to that which is connected to the floor, or that which is grounded. If you're sitting on a chair, that can be your feet, or it can be your buttocks, that which is just connected with the floor, that which is most grounded where you're sitting. Or if you're sitting on the floor, and just feeling this whole expanse of body contacting floor. And softening. When the mind is here, knowing this touch, knowing this feel of body on floor, body on chair, establishing the mind there. But here again, not creating boundaries, not creating a limit to the mind, but instead abiding as the stock phrase, the affirmation goes, I will abide, pervading the all-encompassing world with a mind imbued with loving kindness, like the earth. Abundant, exalted, immeasurable, without hostility and without ill will. So the center of awareness at that spot, but no parameter, no rim to this sphere of awareness. Just letting that goodwill just emanate and radiate. Nice. It's good. It's good to be able to practice with moving attention around the body. Ajahn Mahabua, one of the teachers in the Thai forest tradition, when talking about mindfulness of the body, said that you can just go on tour, go on vacation around the body. You can take this whole fathom-long body and just explore, just go on vacation in the body. I've always appreciated that instruction and learning to be flexible with where one directs one's attention and learning how to place the center of awareness in different parts of the body and seeing what that does to one's awareness. So we'll continue, and the next simile is one of empty space. So practitioners, so suppose there was a person that might come along bringing black or yellow or dark green or crimson dye. So basically paint. Someone comes along with paint, thinking, they're speaking in this way: I shall draw pictures in space, making pictures appear here and there. What do you think about this, practitioners? Could that person delineate a material shape in space? Could they draw anything? No, Lord. What is the reason for this? It is, Lord, that this space is formless and invisible. There should be a not. It is not easy to draw pictures there. That person will eventually get weary and frustrated. So someone comes along and tries to paint empty space. There's nowhere for the paint to land. So even so, practitioners, there are these 5 ways of speaking in which others can speak to you. Someone comes up with their paintbrush. They think they know you. They think they know your position about whatever it is, but it's not the right time. And you can train in this other way. As we've been saying, neither will my mind flip, nor will I utter evil speech, but kindly and compassionate I'll dwell with a mind of loving kindness, devoid of hatred, and I'll abide pervading that person with a mind imbued with loving kindness, and beginning with them, abide pervading the all-encompassing world with a mind imbued with loving kindness, like empty space, abundant, exalted, immeasurable, without hostility and without ill will. This is how you should train yourselves. So back to another mini meditation, and here, see if you can bring your attention to the head. And here, see if you can, this might be a new meditation for some, but one taught by Douglas Harding called On Having No Head, which is basically a perception where you realize that within your visual field, you don't see your own head. It just brings, it's a perception of empty space, which uses the visual field to get out of one's own way and stop imagining a head. So coming to this felt sense of being inside the head, behind the eyes, but not limited to being behind the eyes, not a tiny little homunculus that's chained up behind your eyes and your brain. But coming from this spaciousness, and what does loving kindness feel like coming from here? And here, noticing that there don't need to be limits or boundaries. You can feel the forehead or the back of the head, but awareness is bigger than that. Abiding, pervading the all-encompassing world with the mind imbued with loving kindness like empty space, abundant, exalted, immeasurable, without hostility and without ill will. Nice. Another nice little peak meditation, peak experience. Looking at this open mind. And the next simile, we have the Buddha talking about the Ganges River, talking about water. So suppose, practitioner, that a person comes along bringing a burning grass torch. They might speak thus: I, with this burning grass torch, will set fire to the river Ganges. I will make it scorch up. What do you think about this? Could that person with the morning grass torch set fire to the river's Ganges and make it go ablaze? No, Lord. Why is that? It is, Lord, that the river Ganges is deep, immeasurable. It's not easy to set it on fire with a grass torch. And that person will just get tired, worried, frustrated. So it is that someone might come up to you with these 5 ways of speech. They've got a grass torch that is their opinions, their views, and they might be accurate. They might be accurate, but they're coming with from a place of inner hatred, and it's the wrong time, or maybe it's the right time, but they're coming from a place. They're speaking harshly. It's actually a good time for you. It would be the best time. It's the time for them to give feedback to you, but they're speaking harshly, and it might be true, but they're speaking harshly and with hatred. So how do you respond? In any of these 10 ways of speaking, you should train yourselves. Neither will our minds flip, nor will we utter evil speech, but kindly and compassionate, we will dwell with a mind of loving kindness, devoid of hatred, and we will abide pervading that person with a mind imbued with loving kindness. Beginning with them, pervade the all-encompassing world with a mind imbued with loving kindness, like the Ganges River, abundant, exalted, immeasurable, without hostility and without ill will. So let's do some more coming back to the body, And with a mini meditation, I've been suggesting you can close your eyes. I've been closing my eyes, but the more you practice with these, the less you need to close your eyes. You can still maintain awareness inwardly with your eyes open. So coming to the feeling behind the navel in the dantian, if you're familiar with that term from Chinese anatomy. So attention behind the navel. And here, not paying attention to boundaries, not creating barriers, limits of this is me and that's the rest of the world, in front, behind. But pervading the all-encompassing world with the mind. From this, behind the navel, with the mind imbued with loving kindness. Like the Ganges River, like this cool, deep water. Can't set me on fire. Abundant, exalted, immeasurable, without hostility and without ill will. It's unfortunate. I think most Americans have kind of lost, most modern people have lost the ability or real interest to memorize, but it's a huge part of monastic training, has been since the time of the Buddha, and memorizing this would not be a waste of your time. Especially and you can memorize as much or as little as you want, but having a go-to, a response rather than whatever immediate thought reacts to that person's provocation, having a stock phrase, actually start with just these 3 words: abundant, exalted, immeasurable, abundant, exalted, immeasurable. Just start with those 3. Just memorize those 3: abundant, exalted, immeasurable. Come back into the body, whether it's coming back to the floor, the sense of earth, being undig-upable, or coming back to this being no head, to the empty space behind the eyes, coming back to that abundant, exalted, immeasurable inside the body. Your paint won't land on me. Your perceptions of who I am and what my views are, it doesn't need to land. Empty space doesn't land, doesn't sit, doesn't stick. Coming to being like the water, coming abundant, exalted, immeasurable. And the final simile that comes with this Dhamma resolution, this Dhamma affirmation, is a cat skin bag. And I'll just read the simile and then have gotten some feedback that it might be a little bit a little bit rough, but practitioners, suppose there was a cat skin bag. And if you don't like that idea, I don't really like it. It is striking. But just imagine a well-worn silk bag that was rubbed, well rubbed, very well rubbed. Or how about pleather? You got a pleather bag, soft, silky, rid of rustling and crackling. And a person was come up with a stick or a stone and says, I'm going to make this soft catskin bag, this pleather bag, rustle and crackle with this stick or stone. What do you think? Could that person make it crackle? No. Why is that? Because this catskin bag is rubbed, well rubbed, very well rubbed, soft, silky, rid of rustling and crackling. It's not easy to make it rustle or crackle. That person is just going to get tired and wary and frustrated. So too, someone can come up to you and try to provoke you with all these different types of speech, but you can train to have a mind that's like a catskin bag. Like a catskin bag. And this is just, again, coming back into the body. And we can begin the meditation. Coming into the full body now. And just relaxing. Why the catskin bag image I find striking and useful is that, it's a skin which no longer has any life to it. It's been declawed and it's been defanged. This is a term in Thai for someone who's actually suvacha, for someone who is easy to speak to. It's as if they've had their fangs and their claws removed. They've been defanged and declawed. And I feel like that's what is being pointed to here. So with awareness in the full body. And this can be the single point. This can be the center. But just from here, from this center, pervading the all-encompassing world with a mind imbued with loving kindness, like a catskin bag, like a soft, unrustleable bag, abundant, exalted, immeasurable, without hostility and without ill will. Whole body, just abundant, exalted, immeasurable. Time moves so quickly. Just this last this simile doesn't come along with an affirmation or a mini meditation, although it probably should. This is the very striking conclusion that the Buddha comes to. So practitioners, suppose that there were low-down thieves and they might carve someone up, they might carve you up limb by limb with a double-handed saw. Yet even then, whoever sets their mind with enmity or anger, they, for that reason, is not a practitioner of his teachings. So should you train yourselves, will be ones whose minds will not flip, will not utter evil speech, but kindly and compassionate will dwell with the mind of friendliness, devoid of hatred, and will dwell having suffused the other person with the mind of friendliness, and beginning with them, abide, pervading the whole encompassing world with a mind imbued with loving kindness, abundant, exalted, immeasurable. And with that, the Buddha says that, if you take these affirmations to heart, and if you learn how to embody this skill, then there's no type of speech, gross or subtle, which you couldn't endure. So, leave the formal presentation there and open it up for questions or thoughts. Would love to hear people's thoughts on this. Andrew, please.
Hi, thank you for the teachings. One thing that was coming to mind as you were speaking, especially in the second part, was just how kind of how mindful, how aware, and how present we need to be in order to even notice when we're being kind of like triggered by somebody who's coming up and speaking to us in a provocative way like that. It seems like that's, I don't know, a good first step in the battle, so to speak, is just being aware that somebody's speaking to you and being aware that you're becoming kind of triggered. So just a challenge to start with.
Yeah. Yeah, very true. Thank you for highlighting that. Yeah. And for myself, having periods of meditation in the morning and in the evening, especially in the morning, it kind of primes, it does prime the meditation or the mindfulness pump to some extent for me, a certain type of mindfulness or metacognition, and specifically practicing with these affirmations. That book, Thus You Should Train Yourself, which there's a link to in there. There's a list of about 75 of these different affirmations. And I know one monk who will open up the book and just read one and contemplate it each day, a different one. I know other monks, myself, I've gone through periods actually reading that whole list and kind of priming myself verbally with these thoughts, these aspirations, that they are in line with how I want to live my life. Because it's challenging, as you say, in the moment. But if you've somewhat rehearsed what might happen, that can go a long way. There is one of these other types of intelligence called pugalanyu, which means literally knowledge of persons. So this is somewhat of an interpersonal intelligence, or an intelligence around personality types, and just having a sense for who might trigger you each day. There was a period when I was newly ordained when there was a monk who, he could push my buttons. I didn't even know I had buttons. He pushed buttons that I had no idea I even had. And he was so good at it, and is a great friend still, and he could still push my buttons. But it was extremely predictable that pretty much almost every day, because small community and you see each other's, and we have this monk locker room where the monks kind of do various different things. But I would see him every day and almost every day be triggered. But fortunately, we live in a forest, and I had at that time about a 20-minute walk down from my hut to the meditation hall every morning. And during that time, I had a little ritual. I think I even wrote it down in a little a little book. It was basically all of my ways to calm myself down in preparation for meeting this monk and being triggered by what he was going to say to me. So you can do that. But it does require mindfulness beforehand. So I would, just as takeaway skills, just those 3 words: abundant, exalted, immeasurable, and really learning how to be back in the body. If any one of those particular touch points was especially meaningful or touching for you, then coming back to that and cultivating skill in staying with that. So, and for Vanessa, I was actually able to look up the Pali. Bhante Sujato's translation for that one is not, it's not being able, the translation that I had on that paper was to be able to successfully account for your actions, whereas Bhante Sujato has being able to just try to account for the evidence. So being willing to engage on some level with what the other person is saying. And that said, I do think there is a space for, certainly in our closest relationships, for saying, it's not a good time for me to try to address this. I would like to, and I will try to, express why I did explain myself later, but things are just too hot right now. So I think what that point is going towards is the willingness to engage in further conversation and to account for what you did. So does that make more sense, Vanessa, or did you figure out another possible meaning for it?
Well, I think success could be measured. I mean, I would hope that it could be measured also by the other person understanding your whatever motivations you had that brought up the conflict. But oftentimes they may or may not understand your motivation. So maybe success in that case could be measured by your equanimity. If they don't understand, if you're not successful in relating why or your motivations, then maybe success could be measured by your equanimity. Or I don't know. The word success was interesting there for that.
Yeah, that is interesting. I hadn't thought about it in that way. And I may not have even explicitly brought in equanimity, but I appreciate that you did so, because this virtue which I was pointing to, this sovachasa, suvacho, being easy to speak to, easy to give feedback to, is one which is largely equanimity, especially when we're being provoked. All you can do is be equanimous. I mean, when one gains skill at that and kind of softens, there is a whole edge of the suvacha, easy to speak to spectrum, which is, it's not just, a wall of equanimity, but it's actually, a whole pool of softness and receptivity. But again, doing as much as you can. Hey, yeah. Deborah, please.
Thank you so much, Ajahn. This has been wonderful, and incredibly helpful. The part about being someone easy to talk to is so profound. I actually have a new colleague who is like the easiest, gentlest person to talk to, and I don't even know this person barely, but this person makes you feel so comfortable and safe, and maybe if I'm feeling uptight about something, just the presence of that person kind of brings it down. So that's like I think a really powerful thing to keep in mind, is that, we should strive for that as well, to be that as well.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And yeah, you can see it in some people right away. Some people, you meet them and it's obvious they're easy to speak to and bring things up to them easily. I also appreciate, say, with that monk that I was mentioning, I've lived very closely with him for years and years and years. And I feel like there's also an aspect of this being easy to speak to, which one only sees which is differently gauged by over time, and over pressure. So I've seen this monk respond actually to that exact same monk who presses my buttons. This other monk is totally, it seems, unbutton pressable. I've seen him react so coolly. And that just brought my whole conception of what it means to be suvacho to a whole nother level. It's like, yeah, I see this scene very clearly. It was in the monk's locker room. It was this very triggering monk, and the monk who this other friend was, not pressed. So very memorable. I hope everybody has people in their life like that. Yeah, thank you, Deborah, for bringing that up. Hey, Roy, please.
Hey, Ajahn. I found your comment, the quote from Luangpo Mahabua, to be very interesting. The quote about taking a vacation in your body. Would love to learn a little more about the context, but also Ajahn Chah is rumored to have said, focus on your breath because it'll take you a lifetime to learn it. You can proceed to your body, but there's so much more to be done with the breath. So was he talking about a level of depth of focus that would be preferred?
Yeah, that's fascinating. I don't remember that Ajahn Chah quote, but absolutely. I mean, the more, hopefully, everyone here has gotten a glimpse. Most Westerners have practiced some breath meditation, and hopefully everyone's gotten some taste of that the breath becomes a very, very subtle, very, very nuanced, and very intimate friend over time when you learn different ways of breathing. And I can't imagine that there would be an end to how subtle and profound that relationship could get. And I mean, it's even the Buddha himself, was using breath meditation when he attained enlightenment, according to the Theravada canon. And yeah, for a little bit more context with the Ajahn Mahabua quote, before I turn it over to Rob, we'll have to wrap up fairly soon. But the Ajahn Mahabua word, he used this Thai word tio, which is a very specific type of vacationing. It's like, and it's strange that a forest monk would say this, but you can go tio in the body, and tio is like you get in a van and you like travel around to like a resort, and the monk wouldn't be going to a resort, but basically it's this idea that you can kind of cycle around in your body and explore it and explore how the breath interacts with the body. He was also very big on speaking to that relationship between body and breath. So
Thank you.
yeah, thanks, Rod. Yeah, so Rob, please take it away. And it's been a pleasure to sit with all of you tonight, and good to talk about these things.
Thank you very much, Ajahn, for joining us. I'm just putting one thing in here in the chat. I just want to mention that tonight's class is a Dana-based class. It's offered freely, but if you would like to make a donation to help support the Sati Center and to support Ajahn Kovilo, I'm going to put a link in the chat here if you'd like to make a donation. Also, it'll be in the email that goes out as well. So hold on there. Just putting that in the chat. And with that, thank you very much for joining us. And thank you very much, Ajahn, for being here. Just so you know, Ajahn going to do a day-long with us in person in March sometime. Keep your eye open for that. We'll probably do registration in open up in January or so. Otherwise, hope to see you next. Oh, yes, go ahead.
And just the announcement about next week. So Ajahn Nisabo will be here at this same time next Thursday. So
that was going to be my very, very next thing.
Great.
Yes. So hopefully see you all next week.
Yeah. And also just any donations made, I guess they wouldn't be to me, but they're just to the Clear Mountain Monastery project we're starting in Seattle. So yeah. Thank you, Rob. Thank you, everyone.